I'm Elizabeth Ray.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And Tom Cruise is Jack Reacher in Jack Reacher.
Sometimes, no matter how much work you do prepping for a podcast, a thought occurs to you just when you turn the microphones on, just as you're ready to go, and you have a thought, and usually, at least for me, that thought is very stupid. Today, my thought was, is this the first Tom Cruise film in which he plays the eponymous hero? Is this the first Tom Cruise film in which his name is the title of the film? And of course it's not, but it took me a minute too.
Do I get to look at the list, or do I have to do this from memory?
I can run through the list. I have it up here in front of me, but I think you're going to get the one that is properly eponymous. The one other film other than Jack Reacher in which Tom Cruise plays the title character. It's, here's a clue, your favorite one.
Oh, it's Jerry Maguire.
It's Jerry Maguire.
Jerry Maguire.
Of course
sure.
it's Jerry Maguire.
Yeah.
It took me maybe 3 minutes to think that film existed. I don't feel strong about it.
It's so different
honestly.
from his other movies.
It is. That's exactly it. Particularly at this point, as we're approaching this last
what a
phase
breath of fresh air
Cruise's
that movie
career.
was. Right?
Unlike Jack Reacher, or just like Jack Reacher?
Unlike. Although I will say, I did not hate this movie. I kind of liked it despite itself.
I did not hate this movie either.
Right?
The other movies in which we can argue that Tom Cruise is at least partly eponymous, we've got Night and Day, of course, in which he is one half of the title.
Kind of stupidly. Yeah.
And of course, last week we discussed how he was in fact the Rock of Ages.
Oh, God.
I suppose the only other argument is his cameo in Austin Powers in Goldmember, in which he is actually playing a version of Austin Powers in that film.
Oh.
So on a technicality, he's kind of playing the title character there.
Wild.
Okay. And I suppose he is technically an outsider too. All such nonsense aside, I want to get into our discussion of this film because I really do think that there's a lot to discuss here. I want to do something that I don't normally do at the beginning of a podcast, which is ask for your take. Elizabeth, is this a good film?
I mean, for some people, yes, hands down, just simply a good film.
Sure. Are those people dads?
Those people are dads. Those people are 100% boomer dads. Yeah. And I get it. I do. I'm really not immune to this kind of like libertarian vigilante, the guy saves the girl charm. Like, when he comes and puts his hand on Rosamund Pike's shoulder because he's saved the day and shot the man out from behind her, I did swoon a little bit. I did. It's kind of hot.
Kind of an effective moment.
It's just good.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just because I've been conditioned my whole life or if it's because it's a good story. Like, I'm not really sure.
Well, it's a compelling story. It's an archetypal story. It's
archetypal
the
for
basic
certain.
story, right? But what I find so interesting about this is that its perspective is not what you would necessarily expect, partly because the Jack Reacher stories are written by a British person. It is
that makes so
Midwest
much sense.
Americana reflected through that perspective on America, which means that Jack Reacher is in many ways unorthodox. He is in many ways not what you would expect if this had been written by, the average American boomer dad. Like, I think that this character, you just have to look at his relationship to the military in the course of this film. It's so complex. It's so chewy. There's something like American Gothic happening in some of the ways that he's engaging with the world. The scale of the world feels very small for all that this is set in Pittsburgh, like a major city. It feels like it should be happening in a small town, which is kind of true to the Jack Reacher ethos.
Sure.
Let's get into our discussion of the books first. I want to prime the pump here with the books. Have you ever read a Jack Reacher novel?
No, of course not.
I haven't either, but now I think I may be going to because I find this character fascinating.
I feel it is a fascinating character, and it reminds me of like the Tom Clancy books. Who was his guy?
Sure. Well, he had several guys, but you're thinking of Jack Ryan?
Oh, Jack Ryan is, okay, that's
Jack
Clancy,
Ryan
sure.
is Clancy, sure.
I feel like in general, a lot of
Because I don't
these
think you're
books...
meaning Ding Chavez, right? I don't think you're talking about like Rainbow Six.
Oh, Rainbow Six. No, I was talking about Rainbow Six. That's so weird.
Wild.
Only because, like, again, like this movie took me back to, I guess it would be like that just post 9/11 kind of, we got a little bit more hoorah.
Yeah, there's some of that here for sure, but really it feels much, much older than that. It does. Because it feels like a film about the frontier. It feels like the argument that Reacher is espousing here is one of like rugged frontier independence.
Sure,
like
he's like the sheriff, not even the sheriff, but like...
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's
a vigilante. I don't know.
I think that you watch this film casually. You watch this movie on a plane and you're never going to think about it. But you watch this film critically and it opens up all of these weird little rabbit holes. It's a very unusual film that comes together in the end to yield maybe not that much. Like this turns out, I think, to be kind of fine.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's so close. It's like rubbing shoulders with so many other genres.
Yeah.
Like it's noir inflected sometimes.
Absolutely.
It's just a superhero movie sometimes.
Certainly.
It's definitely a good cop, bad cop, sheriff thing.
Definitely.
There's a Western here somewhere.
Absolutely. The Western genre roots are very deep. It's post-Bourne, post-Mission Impossible, of course, post-Daniel Craig as Bond.
Yeah,
it's got
James
all of that
Bond stuff, for
physicality
sure.
and that ruggedness to it. It is, yeah, you're right. Like it is a melange. It is a
Definitely.
soup of all American heroic culture. But even in that, I think, there's some interesting grit here. There's some grit in the soup. I'm going to mix my metaphor, but that's okay because this is Jack Reacher and we mix a metaphor. He loves it like a horse loves a balloon. I don't know. Let's talk a little about James Dover Grant, who was born in 1954 in Coventry in Warwickshire. He grows up in Birmingham, then attends the University of Sheffield, receiving a Bachelor of Laws in 1977, though he never plans on practicing the law. Instead, he focuses on theatre and television. He's hired by Granada Television, which is one of the more important regions in British commercial television. It's a weird system, don't even worry about it. But Granada Television produces a lot of very well-respected and very prestige-y kind of, particularly crime dramas. They just have a weird in with crime dramas. They produce Prime Suspect. They produce the Robbie Coltrane series Cracker, which was fantastic back in the day. But they also produce Brideshead Revisited, for example, and some of those high-profile costume dramas. And James Grant is involved in all of those productions that I just named. In 1995, after almost 2 decades of working for Granada, he is fired following corporate restructuring. At this point, disillusioned with television and with the compromises that go along with it, he decides to begin writing novels, which he describes as, quote, the purest form of entertainment. He writes his debut quickly, and it is released in 1997. That novel is called Killing Floor. It is released under Grant's pseudonym Lee Child, and it is the first novel featuring former military police officer turned general vigilante, knight-errant, like doer of good, sheriff out on the frontier, Jack Reacher. As of this recording, Child has released 28 Jack Reacher novels. That's one in every single year, except for 2010, when he released 2.
Wow, cool.
The 29th novel, Too Deep, will be released later this year. Child has this unapologetically populist commercial approach to his fiction. These are supposed to be entertaining stories. They are supposed to sell in the millions, and they have. They have sold an estimated 120 million copies worldwide.
That's hot.
This mass market appeal, this anthology structure, perhaps most notably, is obviously very attractive to movie studios as soon as the first book is a hit. Polygram picks up the option very early in the series run, I think in around 2000, but that option lapses. Then New Line buys a new option. That one also lapses because they cannot get the production to line up. And then Paramount Pictures and Cruz Wagner Productions pick up the option in 2005. Josh Olson is hired to adapt One Shot, which is the 9th book in the Jack Reacher series, which was then the most recent book in the Jack Reacher series. But Cruz's career in 2005 is about to go into freefall. Cruz Wagner comes to an end. The United Artists experiment fails. It looks like Cruz's movie star leading man career is over. It is July of 2010. It is 1 month after the release of Night and Day. Paramount starts talking about Mission Impossible passing to Jeremy Renner, and Cruz takes action. He goes to Christopher McQuarrie, with whom he had worked previously on Valkyrie, and persuades him to take Olson's script and completely rewrite it, which he does so thoroughly that Christopher McQuarrie is the only credited screenwriter on this version of the story. This is so that Cruz can build a new franchise, a new home away from home, so that he can continue to make movies when Mission Impossible is taken away from him. That is the plan with Jack Reacher. We'll get into the rest of the story on the other side of the trailer game, which is mine this week.
Okay, I'm excited for it.
Here we go. It's not going to match yours from last week.
Sure.
This week, no singing, I promise. Jack Reacher is not a hero. Sure, he was in the military for a while, but now he's just a drifter. No place to hang his head, no place to call home. He'll just breeze into town, into the middle of a complicated conspiracy and save the day, save the girl, kill those what need killing, and absolutely refusing to sleep with a teenager. Jack Reacher's not a hero. He's just a man who's a hero. Jack Reacher is Tom Cruise is Jack Reacher. Coming summer 2012 to a theater near you. You really blew out the doors on the trailer game last week, and so everything from here, I'm glad we only have 10 episodes left because I don't think we're ever going to match that now.
Your editing is what really sold it, though.
I think it was your singing that sold it, but still.
Well, I just want to say before we jump into everything that I'm so glad that it was Mission Impossible that took off and not Jack Reacher, because even though I did enjoy this movie, I think I have never seen Tom Cruise so miscast. I don't think he works as Jack Reacher at all.
Really interesting. When he was cast, and of course, he is behind the scenes for this entire thing, so there was never a question. There are stories online you can go and talk about, so-and-so was reading for this, so-and-so was interested in this. In 2017, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson claimed that he was in consideration for this role. He absolutely was not at any point, particularly not in 2011 when this film goes into production. This is a Cruise picture all the way. And of course, he takes flack for this casting around the time of the film's release because Jack Reacher in the novels is famously 6'5" and 250 pounds. His immense physical size is the single most definitive thing about the character. And Tom Cruise is not 6'5" and is not 250 pounds. He's a little wiry guy.
And you know what it does to Jack Reacher is it gives him some of that like unattractive short man complex thing.
I think so, though. Also, I think that weirdly, for a movie that is, directed by his buddy Christopher McQuarrie, this is a film that doesn't really know how to shoot Tom Cruise.
I completely agree. Yeah. I know that they find it later, and I'm glad that they do. But in general, I was not impressed with the direction of this film.
Are you thinking of that one sequence where he's laying out the plot in his motel room and he is shirtless and all you can see is his nipple? His nipple is so perfectly aligned in silhouette in the bottom right of the frame for like 5 minutes.
It's very odd.
Because this is a movie that loves long scenes in which not much happens. Lee Child actually he gave the best defense, in fact, for the casting of Tom Cruise, which I really Lee Child, because he is like such a relentless populist, because he just really likes selling millions and millions and millions of books. He's just kind of relentlessly positive and will find the best spin on anything. So going and reading his interviews is actually kind of adorable. But he gives the best perspective on casting Cruise, which is simply this. He said, quote, "Reacher's size in the books is a metaphor for unstoppable force, which Cruise portrays in his own way." The idea here is that it's Cruise's intensity.
That's clever. Yeah, I see it.
I think that when he works in this film, which he often does, it's because of that intensity. It's that weird Tom Cruise-ness. It's actually a really nice way of leveraging that. While we are busy trying to humanize Ethan Hunt, we don't ever have to humanize Jack Reacher because the man is not human.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that as a take. That's true. I was actually thinking specifically, though, of the car chase. You get Tom Cruise doing his own stunts, of course.
All his own
driving this car. And they're just shooting it in such a way that it neither looks impressive nor exciting, and it's really hard to not decide to take a bathroom break.
No, I think the car chase is probably the dullest part of this film.
That's so weird. And it's such a hot car, that red Chevelle.
I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with each individual shot of the car chase, but we're not building pace. We're not building a geography. We don't have that sense of where these cars are in relation to each other, except when they're in the same frame. And even then, it's not always easy to tell what's going on. But
and then twice we render the chase inert when we kill the car and it won't start. And then when he's like slowly cruising, looking for the other car, and neither of those work at all.
The slow cruising is a real failure and reminds me of Risky Business. It feels like a throwback to you remember the really slow motion chase with the Porsche in Risky Business?
Right.
It's almost exactly the same sequence.
So strange.
And then the other, when the car stalls, that is because the car actually stalled. That is Cruise driving. He blows it and stalls the car, but stays so much in character, and his intensity, his Cruise as an actor intensity, reads so much as Reacher's desperation in that moment, his intensity, that McQuarrie decided to keep it in the film. But
that can't be entirely true, though, because we get close-ups of him on...
and then we shoot pickups. But that one shot where you see him slide in and you see his jaw clench, that is Cruise blowing the shot, and they just keep the cameras rolling, and then you're right. They do shoot extra pickups to build it into the rest of the film. But
fair enough.
That one moment is apparently real. And whenever you hear those stories about, that was just a thing that happened on set and we decided to keep it, I always take those stories with a giant grain of salt anyway.
Fair.
Because you and I have made films. We know that it doesn't really work like that, even at the scale we were making films. The best you get is, you did a thing? Can you do that again so that we can get coverage of it, so that we can get better sound rolling on it, so that we can really fit it in? Yeah.
Totally.
It's a very complicated and collaborative process.
Indeed. Not so pure as, say, a novel.
Exactly right. So there's really not that much backstory on this because it is just a Cruise production from first to last. He brings this to Paramount. McQuarrie is hired to write. McQuarrie is then hired to direct. This is, of course, McQuarrie's first film in the directorial chair since his disastrous debut outing, The Way of the Gun, in 2005, which put him in director jail so hard that it seemed as though he would never direct again, and he wouldn't have done, except for his friendship, his working professional relationship with Tom Cruise. And I do want to emphasize, I think, how good Cruise and McQuarrie are going to be.
Right.
Very, very soon.
I agree.
The next time they show up together, they're going to be really strong, I think. And you can see a lot of that here. It's so mismatched. It's so hard to determine moment to moment what is not working in this film. Because sometimes it is Cruise. Sometimes it's the casting. Sometimes it's Reacher as a character. Sometimes it's Reacher as a character in this particular stylized tone.
I don't mind Reacher as a character, but anytime they give him a speech, it doesn't work. I just don't buy Jack Reacher as a speech guy.
Yeah.
He seems like he should be much more of like a terse. I compared him last night when we were watching to like Ron Swanson. Like you want somebody who is, you know what I mean?
That is fantastic. Nick Offerman could totally play Jack Reacher. I am absolutely down for that. But I think that, Ron Swanson also makes speeches. He will also, when the time is right, he will declaim. He will orate.
True. He does declaim.
Which is not really what Reacher does. And it does feel maybe as though we're trying to fit 3 books worth of monologue into one movie.
Sure,
he takes
that's fair too.
A few too many options, but I'll tell you, I will take the monologues over the quips. I will take him speechifying over his extremely misjudged comedic barbs at his opponents.
Yeah,
I think the comedic tone of this film is all over the goddamn place.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that a couple times I really laughed out loud.
That's good. I can't remember laughing out loud right now, but I probably did.
I remember you getting very annoyed at me laughing out loud because you hated the joke so much. We'll get
that sounds
to
accurate.
that. Let's talk about the rest of the cast. Let's talk about Rosamund Pike, who is born in Hammersmith in London in 1979. Her parents are Julian Pike and Caroline Friend, who are both professional opera singers. So she grew up in a particular environment, in a particular atmosphere. She appears in a National Youth Theatre production of Romeo and Juliet as a teenager, but is then turned down by all of the acting schools to which she applied. And in some versions of the story, she applied to literally every single acting school in England.
I'm sorry to say this does not surprise me.
Instead, she goes off to read English literature at Wadham College at Oxford. She graduates in 2001, but by this point, she has actually already established herself on stage in the context of her college. She makes her big screen debut the following year as Miranda Frost in Die Another Day, where she fights with Halle Berry. And is generally pretty good in that film, actually.
Vague recollections of this.
She plays the triple agent.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
alongside Gustav Graves, Toby Stevens, beloved of this parish.
Yeah.
Yes. And Madonna's weird cameo in that film, too.
So strange.
Also, really strong theme song. We're just circling the possibility of a Bond franchise podcast we could do together.
I think we can't do that, but yes.
We'd really hate it by the time we got to the middle third is the problem.
So much. We'd be so upset.
Following that, she's weirdly frosty, I think, as Jane Bennett in the 2005 Matthew Macfadyen, Keira Knightley, Pride and Prejudice, the Joe Wright Pride and Prejudice. I don't think she works in that film terribly well at all. How do you like her?
The one moment where she's like happy crying is really good, and everything else doesn't really work.
Sure. Yeah. She appears in An Education in 2009, of course, which is one of her breakout roles. She just is an actor that keeps breaking out. She keeps being rediscovered, even though she's had 20 years of career behind her at this point. She's really quite good in the conclusion to Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy, The World's End, in 2013.
Sure.
And then in 2014, and I want to emphasize this very powerfully because I think that we don't particularly like Rosamund Pike, and I think that we don't particularly like Rosamund Pike in this film, but I want to emphasize that she delivers one of the all-time great dramatic performances in David Fincher's Gone Girl in 2014. I think that is such a blisteringly good performance that it kind of makes the whole... I think Affleck is also great in that film. I think Carrie Coon just blows the doors off in a very quiet way, which is a weird thing to say.
Fantastic.
I think that film is anchored in 3 just fantastic performances, and Rosamund Pike is probably the best of them.
Yeah.
I think she's genuinely terrific as Amy.
It is perfect casting for her because you're right. She does come off sometimes as just unknowable, and that sometimes reads as shallow. But
yes, or
in
as
Gone
cold,
Girl, or
yes,
cold,
or as brittle,
calculating,
yeah,
brittle.
exactly,
yes,
exactly,
yes.
yeah.
But I think she does work you're right, in Gone Girl. And similarly, I think she works in a silly, shallow way in Saltburn, which I know you haven't seen.
Yeah,
and
no.
You have no reason to see.
I have no interest in seeing
That's
Saltburn.
okay.
I have
you
to
don't,
tell you.
don't. But yeah, I liked her.
I think, though, that
she's fit, anyway.
She's bad casting here, right?
Bad casting, yeah.
I think that you need someone who is warmer. You need someone with more heart.
Let's talk about this trope. Let's talk about the sexy, capable lawyer woman trope who still needs a man's help. Like, this is, I feel like you could dress as this woman for Halloween and everyone would get it. You know what I'm saying?
That's absolutely true. And this is one of the things that I find most interesting about Jack Reacher as a film, is that you're right. We've seen this person 100 times. This person is in every John Grisham adaptation through the 1990s.
Oh, 100%.
Right? We've
100%.
seen this before. But what's so interesting is the extra layer that's added in because of the mythic architecture of Jack Reacher. Yes, this woman needs Jack Reacher. She's a capable woman who needs Jack Reacher's help. But in this world, everybody needs Jack Reacher's help.
Exactly. Yeah.
Every single person. So it becomes not about
it's not like
her
particularly misogynistic. It's just,
it's so weird.
It is very strange. Yeah. It's hard to unpick
find
that.
It fascinating. But you're right. Like, I think of someone like Julia Roberts, for example, like from The Pelican Brief, who can deliver something similar.
100%.
A Holly Hunter in the mid-90s could have delivered. Because I think that this version of the character needs more warmth than she needs capability, which is a sad thing to say, but this character is pretty flat as written. Like, she's just not that interesting, not that compelling, and actually not that capable. So coming in like you are, the rising star in the legal scene of Pittsburgh is maybe not the direction that you want to go. The other person who was really considered for this, coming off of her performances as Agent Carter, was Haley Atwell, who we love and who we'll have the opportunity to talk about in a few weeks' time.
Can't wait to see her.
But can't imagine her in this film as this version of this character. That would have been an absolute waste of her.
That would have been fundamentally miscast as well.
So I think we can agree, after the fact, that we would like this character to be rewritten so that she is in fact more capable and is maybe a better match for Rosamund Pike's particular qualities as an actress. But as it stands, you need someone with warmth. You need someone who can be the heart. You need someone who can be so touched by the families of these victims as though she had never encountered the families of victims before.
Yeah.
That sequence sucks. We'll talk about it.
It does. Yeah, there are a lot of sequences that suck. Okay.
The year that she performs in Gone Girl, she is, of course, nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress, up against Reese Witherspoon for Wild, Felicity Jones for The Theory of Everything, Marion Cotillard for 2 Days, One Night, and the winner, which is an overdue Julianne Moore for Still Alice, which she does not deserve for that film, but she was due. It was her time. I think Rosamund Pike should get that, though I love Felicity Jones in The Theory of Everything.
I didn't see a single one of those movies that year.
This was a tough time for you. You were very busy. You were very busy almost having your eldest son.
Yes. Yeah. I was heavily pregnant and I was deep in the church and I was not, taking in any entertainment that wasn't, can we call entertainment? Like, I was listening to sermons and
a lot of VeggieTales?
VeggieTales. Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, definitely not Hollywood movies, though.
See, that's another thing that does not come up in the course of this film, but apparently in the books, Jack Reacher is like very aggressively atheistic. Like, he is very cynical about organized religion. Yeah, right? Which is a thing that
makes a lot of sense, too, though. In that way that I said, there's this, like, very individualistic, libertarian, like, almost... Not the Ayn Rand, but the Brad Bird version of, what did you call it? Objectivism?
Yeah.
Yes, there's something there where it's just one man, but really one good person doing good and changing the world through goodness, but like just being right and excellent.
But that's completely true and very astute. But even in this film, that's opposed with this like noirish sense that the entire world is corrupt.
Yes.
And there are only a few good people.
Right. And that they cannot live in this world, so they have to live somehow underneath it or skirting around it or in the shadows.
Right. That idea that Reacher cannot be reintegrated. That he has to just keep moving on because he has no home, because he fits outside of society, which is also like classically almost a Byronic kind of, romantic hero idea, right? It's kind of Heathcliffy, is that you have to live outside of society because you are too exceptional. You are too wild and sensual. And we're so interested in
exactly, but yes,
not in this case, right?
Yes.
But aspects of that, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the ways in which we depict heroes who integrate with society and heroes who do not. Right, the contrast between the courtly chivalric knight and the knight errant, right? The guy who is out there on his own, just doing good for the sake of doing good. In superhero mythologies, you get like the hero who is a part of the team and the hero who is and remains an outcast, right? Like, I just find that kind of the integration of society very interesting.
It is.
Let's continue moving through our cast. Let's talk about the fantastic Richard Jenkins, who is a legend.
Great.
I had to take the opportunity to talk about him because I just adore him. He has 116 IMDb credits. He has been, dear listener, in 3 of your favorite films, no matter what your favorite films are. He has definitely been in them. He's born in 1947 in Illinois. He studies drama at Illinois Wesleyan. Then he moves to Providence, Rhode Island, where he works with the Trinity Repertory Company before breaking into TV in 1974. His IMDb known for is The Shape of Water in 2017 and The Visitor in 2007, for which he receives nominations for Best Supporting Actor and Best Actor, respectively, and both Step Brothers and Burn After Reading in 2008. That is an impressive known for, and that doesn't even begin to tell the whole story.
Yeah.
The Witches of Eastwick and How to Make an American Quilt, and There's Something About Mary and I Heart Huckabees. He is genuinely fantastic as Bradley Whitford's buddy/sidekick in The Cabin in the Woods, a movie which I continue to have to be reminded that you have not seen.
I know.
We will definitely watch that this October. I think you'll really enjoy it. Bradley Whitford is great in that movie.
Always.
I think that Richard Jenkins is, an actual cast iron legend. How did you enjoy his performance in this film?
I love him in this film. The only thing I didn't like is that the only thing that I love from him that I didn't get in this movie is his sense of humor.
Yes.
He's so funny, and he didn't get a chance to do that here, which was too bad.
Yeah, he really does have just unimpeachable comic timing.
I completely agree.
And
just a real twinkle in his eye.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of people who absolutely rule, let's talk about the extremely handsome David Oyelowo, who is just such a
Sidney Poitier guy.
Isn't it amazing
100%.
how much he is? I mean, he already kind of looks like Sidney Poitier, but he is styled in this film to be exactly, Sidney Poitier
those,
as
navy
Mr.
blue
Tibbs
suits.
in like the early 70s. It's the suits are a slightly thinner cut, like they're a more modern cut, but apart from that, it's striking how much he has that. Yeah. Not the voice, which is interesting. He's still doing his, what I think is a really fantastic American accent. A very
naturalistic I would never
American
have known.
Because he is, of course, British. He's born in Oxford in 1976. He grows up in London until the age of 6. When he moves with his family to Lagos in Nigeria, he returns to the UK at the age of 14, where he falls in love with acting. He's trained at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art at LAMDA, from which he graduates in 1998. At that point, he goes immediately into the Royal Shakespeare Company. In 2001, in a triumph of colorblind casting, which was enormously controversial at the time, but is now extremely well remembered, he plays Henry V in all 3, in both Henry IV plays and in Henry V, and was just incredibly well received for his work. He really kind of earned his reputation through that crucible, not just a reputation as a fantastic actor, but as a real leader in the way that we think about the depictions of color and diversity on screen and on stage. And he absolutely rocked that. And his reward for that was a leading role in the BBC TV series Spooks, which came to the United States as MI5. It is about, James Bondian style British espionage. It was a hugely successful series in Britain and really earned a bit of a following in this country too. But you, I can tell, have not heard of it.
I've never heard of it. I'm sorry to say.
It might be worth going back and checking it out, honestly. Yeah, I remember watching it as it was airing originally in the UK. And it's really good. Just, a kind of procedural crime boiler kind of situation, but really strong performances throughout. In 2006, Oyelowo is in The Last King of Scotland. In 2012, as well as in Jack Reacher, he also appears this same year in Lincoln and Ava DuVernay's Middle of Nowhere. He cameos in Interstellar as the principal of the school. He is, of course, most famous for playing Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma, for which he is absolutely... he is nominated so many times for that performance and wins so many awards for that performance that it becomes striking that the Academy does not nominate him for Best Actor. This leads directly. This is some of the fuel on the fire of Oscars So White.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the performances that really changes our understanding of how the Academy is interacting with some of the best actors working in this country. Then just last year, he plays the legendary and eponymous U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves in the Chad Fian series on Paramount, Lawman Bass Reeves, which is a show that I want to go and watch because if you've never read about Bass Reeves, which I have, you should read about Bass Reeves like I have.
I guess I'll have to.
He's really interesting.
Okay.
How do you like David Oyelowo in Jack Reacher?
I think he's great. I think he was pitch perfect the whole time. I don't recognize him from these other films very much just because I haven't seen many of them. Sure. But this is excellent work. I think that he really rounds out the cast really beautifully too.
I think he is genuinely fantastic. Yeah. And not just because he is giving Sidney Poitier, although that is a very welcome thing too.
And it is just something that I like, sure.
It's lovely, but he is capable of holding these shots and communicating so much just with his eyes, giving him these sequences both at the beginning of the film and then during the investigation kind of pivots the film in the middle. He's doing all of that without a single line of dialogue, and he's fantastic. And then when we hand him lines of dialogue, he's fucking brilliant.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. You were saying earlier how much they like to hold these long scenes. Yeah. But that's right. The whole opening sequence, there's no dialogue at all. Yeah, and we're really 100% with this guy.
We'll talk about it. We'll get into it. What do you think of the reveal that Emerson is actually in the employ of the Zek? I mean, this is a film that loves to foreshadow its twists somewhat dubiously. And this is one that caught me genuinely by surprise. I did not think we were going to do this with Emerson. When he comes into the elevator, I thought that, we're pairing he and Helen up now, and something bad is about to happen, but I did not expect the bad thing that was going to happen to be him.
Okay, that's interesting to me. I did. For some reason, I thought that the movie was handing that to us. I didn't realize exactly why, but I think it's when Reacher calls Helen and says, hey, one of these two guys and maybe both are in on it. I was just like, yeah, one of these two guys and maybe both are in on it. And that was it.
Okay, so you weren't expecting the dad? You weren't expecting Richard Jenkins?
I mean, I was expecting one or both. Yeah, sure, I don't know. Sure. I was like, Reacher told me it was one of these guys and maybe both of them. So yeah, now they're both persons of interest.
Is an unimpeachable moral authority. We know this to be true. Lastly, we have to talk about the weirdest bit of casting in this entire film. He is cast just days before principal photography begins. We have Werner Herzog, noted German documentarian and filmmaker.
You know, I think he's great. I think he's killing it, right?
He's given like among the best versions of this performance that I have ever seen. And frankly, I've seen a lot of versions of this performance, right? James Bond is stuffed with this performance, particularly through the Brosnan and Craig years.
And they're always chewing the scenery.
Yeah.
And this guy is not.
Well, except that he is, but he's doing it in this very detached and disaffected Herzog way. It's really genuinely fantastic. Born in 1942 in Munich in Germany, he is, just a revolutionary documentarian. He self-funded his early films by working night shifts in a steel mill. This is when he is still attending high school by day.
Holy smoke.
This is who Werner Herzog is. He shoots his early work on a 35mm camera that he stole from the Munich Film School, though later he says, quote, I don't consider it theft. It was just a necessity. I had some sort of natural right for a camera, a tool to work with.
I mean, I can't condone that publicly on this podcast, but I get it.
I want to tell you how difficult it was for me to deliver that in my normal voice and not to slip into, well, not even Werner Herzog's voice, but actually Paul F. Tompkins' impression of Werner Herzog. Paul F. Tompkins has played Werner Herzog many, many times. Particularly over on the podcast Comedy Bang Bang. But it's very difficult not to, I don't consider it theft. it's very neutral, like disaffected. It's just fantastic. I absolutely love it. He is one of the voices which defines New German cinema, particularly as a response to French New Wave cinema. This is through the 60s and the 70s. And I mean, we could legitimately do a podcast series where we just look at each of his films in turn, because I think that each one is worthy of a great deal of investigation. Those would be long shows too. If we were seeking any kind of comprehensivity, that would be a very ambitious piece of work. But, The Enigma of Caspar Hauser and Fitzcarraldo and Invincible. Jack Reacher comes out 3 years after his double-header release of Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans and My Son, What Have You Done in 2009. Elizabeth, obviously, we don't have time to get into everything that is Werner Herzog, but you like him in this film?
I think he's great. Yeah, such a surprise to see. And again, I was ready for something that was just much more villainy, much more mustache twirly. Yeah. But I really like this idea of him just being a survivor.
It's so interesting. I am still, I think, struggling to get to the philosophical nut of this conflict, because it feels as though we're doing mirroring, right? It feels as though this is some classic Mission Impossible villain mirroring Ethan Hunt kind of thing that we're leaning into here. But Jack Reacher is so unusual, and his ideology is so unusual and so difficult to pin down precisely. And Zex seems to be quite elemental, right? This idea that you will do anything to survive, but that's not his whole ideology. That's just like the fallback position that he adopts. He can do anything, so he can do anything. That's a really interesting position. But we seem to be balancing that with Reacher's, drifter status, that there's nothing that he cares about. He has nothing to lose, so he can do anything. But that's not philosophically aligned quite as precisely as it would be if you came in with that as the heart of your story idea, right? This is an adaptation of a novel.
The Skyfall, Javier Bardem.
Exactly right. Exactly. Yeah, every one of the Daniel Craig movies is in some sense this. We just do this story over and over and over again until we stop doing Daniel Craig stories. But yeah, I'm really interested. And as I say, we've done it a couple times in Mission Impossible too, and we'll get to more examples of that as we continue on. But I find it really interesting. I find Werner Herzog just fantastic. I think the performance is so great. It kind of sucks that he has to stand next to Jai Courtney for most of this film, who is
Charlie?
A potato.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, he was compelling to me in the opening sequence as the shooter.
Yes.
It was such a compelling opening sequence, I suppose.
I think he benefits from that.
Yeah, but basically as soon as you give him dialogue, it starts to falter pretty hard.
Do you know Jai Courtney? Are you familiar with his extensive filmography? He was a Divergent. He came into that series. He was also in Terminator Genesis. He was in one of the latter Terminator sequels.
Okay.
I don't want to lay this entirely at his feet, but let's just say that shortly after appearing in those films, those franchises died. Just withered up and died. They keep dragging him back into the DC universe. I guess what was the DC universe that has now come to an end, where he can play Captain Boomerang. He appears in Suicide Squad and in The Flash and in the Birds of Prey movie.
Oh, yeah. I never saw any of those.
Yeah, he's just not good. This is also, I will note, his second ever performance. His third ever performance. I think this is really where the world turned against him. I don't think people were really objecting to Jai Courtney for his role in Jack Reacher.
Sure.
But the year after this, he appears as John McClane's son in a Die Hard sequel, in A Good Day to Die Hard. Which is...
Good Day to Die Hard.
That's 2013. 2014 is he has a minor role in I, Frankenstein, where honestly, I seem to recall him being just fine. I don't think he ever stood out to me there. He's in Divergent. He's in Felony and The Water Diviner. And then it's, 2015. He's back in Divergent series Insurgent. And then in Terminator Genesis, where he plays Kyle Reese, who is like a really important character.
Yeah. Oh, no.
And that's just really bad casting. Oof. Genesis is that's a really interesting failure of a film. Emilia Clarke is so bad in that film. She's violently miscast.
Yeah.
But she's so bad in that film, I'm kind of surprised that she still has a career.
Woof.
That's why she went to Hallmark. You guys, that's why.
I was going to say, does she still have a career?
Well,
I mean, okay, great.
This movie is shot by the man, the legend, Caleb Deschanel, who worked on the original series of Twin Peaks. Of course, he is partly responsible for giving Twin Peaks its very distinctive style.
Yeah.
He shoots The Right Stuff and Hope Floats and National Treasure. Second week in a row that we mentioned National Treasure here on the podcast. He shot two extremely successful and not very good movies, Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ and Jon Favreau's live-action remake of The Lion King. So he is responsible for shooting $2 billion plus movies.
Yeah, okay.
Which is a wild thing. He's part of the first ever graduating class from the American Film Institute. He was there on the ground the first day of the AFI, which is really cool.
Wow.
And of course, he's Emily and Zoe's dad. So that's cool too.
Yeah, sure.
I think this movie looks great.
Yeah. No, my second note that I have is cinematographer showing up for work. Like, it looks great.
Yeah, I don't love some of the color grading.
No.
I think some of our editing choices, some of our blocking choices,
I think is really poor.
Are not always fantastic. And I will say, right, we can't just put the blame at the feet of Christopher McQuarrie. I think that Caleb Deschanel doesn't really always know how to shoot Tom Cruise.
No,
I think
that's also true.
And it's not that it's just bad. It's that I'm struggling to understand what cinematically we're trying to articulate about Jack Reacher in some of these shots. And again, not always, but some of these shots are very awkward.
He doesn't seem to know how to shoot action. Like, the action sequences always feel really lame for some reason.
That to me, 100% I'm going to blame the editor for. Because as I say, I think every individual shot, or most individual shots, almost all individual shots, are really nicely composed, are really nicely balanced.
No, that's true.
But when they cut together that it loses all of its motive force. It does.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
This is why, editing is so important and so extremely hard.
Mm-hmm.
Principal photography runs from October 3rd, 2011 to January 17th, 2012, which means that Cruise is almost done shooting this movie when Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which he shot before shooting Rock of Ages, is finally released in December of 2011. And suddenly, his career doesn't look so unstable after all. this film makes so much sense as a bunker where he can continue to work.
Yeah.
If the apocalypse happens and the rest of his career is burned to the ground, which looks absolutely likely after the continuing failure of these projects. As I say, he really summons Christopher McQuarrie. He shines the McQuarrie signal into the sky a month after the release of Night and Day, when things are not looking good at all to be Tom Cruise.
Yep.
Jack Reacher is scored by Joe Kramer, who is buddies with McQuarrie and Bryan Singer in Boston. McQuarrie hires him for his aforementioned directorial debut, The Way of the Gun, in 2005, and Kramer works pretty consistently thereafter. He returns in this podcast series because he works on Rogue Nation, though now he's perhaps better known for scoring Big Finish audio dramas in the UK. Big Finish is a company that produces original audio dramas mostly around Doctor Who. They just get the original casts back and do Doctor Who episodes, except they're just in audio.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and Kramer is scoring a lot of those and is very, very well regarded for the work that he does there, as he should be well regarded for the work he does here.
I think so. I think it's such a strong score. It's very intense. It's very moving. It heightens the action, which we need because, as we said before, the editing on the action isn't always great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic work.
My one criticism is the main Jack Reacher theme is a little epic. It's a little grandiose. It's just a little big. And if it were a little bit smaller, that would work. But paying close attention as we're moving through this film, he is weaving like leitmotifs through this movie. We're getting all of this like complex and interesting work. And what's even better than that is how often the score drops away entirely and we are left in silence. It's a really simultaneously extremely ambitious and extremely disciplined bit of work. I think, he deserves a lot of attention for the score for this film. It's fantastic. The movie's released in the US on December 21st, 2012, 6 months after Rock of Ages and a year after Ghost Prot, and it is met with a very tepid reception for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the American premiere, is cancelled because we are immediately in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting. And McQuarrie and Cruise apparently stand up to the studio and say, no, we are pulling this premiere. This does not feel right. This does not feel good.
Tone deaf, for sure.
So there's no premiere to provide that additional marketing push as you go into your opening weekend. And then in that opening weekend, it opens second at the box office behind the 8th week of the first of Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies.
Oh, well, of course.
But even after 8 weeks, An Unexpected Journey is just eating everybody's lunch. It takes $10 million. Opening at number 2, Jack Reacher takes $5 million.
Oh my God.
There's just no money to be had at the box office because everyone has spent it on The Hobbit.
Why?
Third at the box office is the other new release of the week, Judd Apatow's This Is 40. And the rest of the chart is a weird mess because The Hobbit is everywhere, so everyone else is just doing this weird counter-programming. They're putting out things from earlier in the year. So if you just don't want to see The Hobbit for the 4th time, you can go and see one of these other films. It's technically the 31st week of the movie Rise of the Guardians. Do you remember that movie?
Vaguely, yeah. I've heard good things about that movie, though.
I've never seen it.
I've heard that it's good.
It's the 36th week of the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2, which makes like another $2 million coming back into the movie theaters for like 2 weeks. It's the 43rd week of both Lincoln and Skyfall, and the 50th week of Wreck-It Ralph. All of these movies back in the theaters because no one wants to run anything real against those rascally dwarves and that very noble hobbit. What's interesting, though, is that Jack Reacher continues to sell tickets. If you remember all the way back to our episode on Top Gun, that was when I talked about multipliers, the connection between your first weekend take and the amount of money that you will eventually make at the domestic box office. And the idea is that the better your multiplier, the higher that number, the lower proportion of your final take is represented by your first weekend gross, the better word of mouth is around your film. And Jack Reacher just keeps selling tickets. It does $5 million that first weekend. It goes on to sell $80 million worth of cinema tickets. That is a multiplier of 16, which turns out to be exactly the same multiplier as Ghost Prot. So though this film costs much less, it has a budget of $60 million, takes 80 at the domestic box office, and then goes on to make $218 million worldwide. It is a hit. And in terms of its fraction, in terms of its ratio, in terms of its multiplier, it is as big a hit as Ghost Protocol.
Wow.
Problem is, even in 2012, studios don't care about ratios. They don't care about your multiplier. They don't care about how you return your investment. They care about hitting $1 billion or not hitting $1 billion. And this did not hit $1 billion. So even with $218 million at the international box office, a sequel was not guaranteed. It's the success of Ghost Prot, ironically, that makes the sequel to Jack Reacher an inevitability.
Wow.
We'll talk about that in 4 weeks when Christopher McQuarrie does not return, and instead we hand the reins over to Edward Zwick, who directed, of course, The Last Samurai.
Well, I'd love to see him again. Last Samurai was great. And, I don't think that it had really sunk in that there were 2 Jack Reacher movies.
Jack Reacher, Never Look Back.
Okay.
Is the sequel.
All right. I'm kind of looking forward to it.
No. Let's manage expectations. Even people who like Jack Reacher say that movie is extremely bad. Okay. And of course, we have to recognize that it killed the franchise.
Yeah.
So it cannot be that good. And
okay. Heard.
Yeah, I think that's going to be taking our medicine here as we close out our podcast run looking at the career of Tom Cruise. I'll note this, though. The response is generally quite good. And when the response is very good, particularly from critics, it is very good because of Cruise. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone, who I'm quoting basically every week because he is very fond of Cruise at this point in his career. He writes in Rolling Stone, quote, "This is Cruise's show and he nails it. The patented smile is gone, replaced by a glower that makes Jack Reacher a dark and dazzling ride into a new kind of hell." End quote. Which, no, come on. Peter, did you eat breakfast, Peter? You might have a granola bar and then look back at that and decide if that's really what you want to say. Because what he meant to say is, Cruise is really good in a film that is fine.
Yeah. I just don't think that Cruise works in this.
I think that's
what style?
A completely defensible position.
Yeah.
So with all that said, and after almost an hour of preamble, should we get into the movie? Shall we talk about Jack Reacher?
Let's go. I guess we'll skip the chase scene. We did that already.
Right. I think that there is a compelling argument that this opening sequence is just really masterful and
really
is absolutely the best part of the film. This is where we open on the glamorous Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where a sniper painstakingly prepares to kill 5 people from a parking garage. It is wordless. It is largely silent once we get past that very overwrought initial theme.
Which again, I liked, but yes, maybe a little overwrought.
I think it really draws us in. And when we see, protagonism on screen, it is in the form of David Oyelowo. He's, as we said, styled to completely look like Sidney Poitier, which anchors us very much in this cynical 70s new wave kind of crime drama, which totally works for this film. We get, without dialogue, this entire sequence unfolding where he investigates the scene where he arrests James Mark Barr. 3 names. That's how you know he's a killer.
You recognize James Barr, right?
I don't.
I'm so happy to tell you that he is another Grey's Anatomy guy. He showed up as a patient who had a hysterical male pregnancy.
That's that guy.
That's that guy.
Sure. Wow. No, weirdly, this time I did not go looking. I have bookmarked in my browser the Grey's Anatomy fan wiki just to go through everyone who appears in a Tom Cruise movie. I didn't make it that far down the list. It's weird that he is not very good in this film. I don't remember him in Grey's Anatomy, for what it's worth. But
well, it's a very comical performance in Grey's.
Sure.
Obviously, hysterical male pregnancy is going to be comical, so it's very different. But I found him, he worked for me in his final sequence on the bed.
He's so
in the hospital room.
Sidelined. It's a strange performance. Yeah. I mean, I understand that you really cast him not for the beginning of the film, but for the end of the film, where he can feel such intense contrition and regret for what he did in Iraq that we can feel okay about him being exonerated for this terrible crime. We can feel that justice has to some extent been done, even though our establishing move is to categorize him as a bad dude.
Interesting. Okay, I hear what you're saying.
And obviously it works for you.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I like him. I like this part of the story. I find compelling. I found it interesting at first. It was a strange gambit to show us right from the beginning that the guy they were chasing was not the guy who did it. Yeah.
So we get the first of 2 fantastic David Oyelowo monologues here. The first time when he's telling Barr what is going to happen to him and the choices he has in front of him are ugly, but he can at least confess. And we get this slow pan around the room as we're moving the camera in a circle around him, and we reveal that yes, this guy, this Barr, is not the sniper that we just saw previously.
Right.
It's handled like a reveal because it is a reveal.
It is, yeah.
It comes very early. It's somewhat disorienting. Mm-hmm. What do you think of the film playing this so early and so clearly that we are introduced to this entire plot as a conspiracy? That is first. In the traditional 1970s version of this, we would have spent 20 minutes investigating this crime only to learn that maybe he wasn't the shooter.
Right.
And we still play out that sequence of Jack Reacher going to the parking garage, going to the bridge, figuring it all out, except that we already know, which leaves us more distant from Reacher's POV, which is a distancing trick that the film does again and again and again. It doesn't want us to be too close to Reacher, right?
Sure, but because he's supposed to be a little bit superhuman and a little bit like
a little bit mythical, a little bit archetypal. Yeah. Like he always knows more or less than we do. We are almost never absolutely in his shoes, cinematically speaking. And I find that interesting. But do you think that this film would work better if it had taken a more traditional approach and really led us into this mystery, only to have it be revealed as a conspiracy down the road? Or do you like the way that it does this Columbo twist where it shows us the killer killing?
Yeah.
And then it's more of a howdunit rather than a whodunit.
I didn't think about Columbo, but you're so right about that. I do think that ultimately it does work, but I think that they definitely could have done it in a more traditional sense. In general, the movie fails for me in that it just doesn't keep me feeling suspense as much as I feel like it should. And I think that might be one of the ways that it does it.
And I wonder to what degree it's a postmodern move, right? I wonder to what degree, had they presented it more traditionally, had they presented it just as a crime, had Barr been arrested and we, the audience, have no reason to believe that he is not the suspect, perhaps we, the audience, would be looking for a conspiracy anyway, just because it's a big budget action movie released in 2012, right?
Yeah, like sure. Something's got to be different. Yeah.
Exactly. Something's going to be not what we expect. Yeah. Someone's going to be more or less than they seem. That's maybe just, a postmodern reaction to audience expectations is just put it out front and center. No, you're right. Now see how it unfolds rather than wondering whether it's going to unfold, which is a thing that the movie does a couple times. We're going to circle around to the reveal that perhaps not all the victims were what we thought. And the first time that we go through that, you and I were watching the movie thinking, hey, come on, this is badly done. This guy is clearly not the guy that you are describing. And it turns out that, no, of course he's not. There's more to him than there seems to be. So, the way that this film dances with postmodernism, I think, and certainly dances with audience expectations, is an interesting one.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment to say that I just realized that you know who we forgot to talk about?
Who?
Robert Duvall.
Well, I was kind of saving it for the end, but big Robert Duvall.
Big Robert Duvall, and I
Holy
think
smokes.
The best casting of Robert Duvall I may have ever seen. He is perfect. I love him.
It's astonishing.
Isn't it great?
It's genuinely brilliant. He has genuinely brilliant chemistry with Cruise. He's the only person in the film with genuinely brilliant chemistry with Cruise. Yeah, Cruise comes to life in a way that is just, not really evident anywhere else in the film. It's playful, it's smart, it's well structured. He's giving a really nice perspective on loyalty, but also decency. He's a man of principle, and that's really just some shitty stuff about that sequence, which we'll talk about when we get to it.
Sure.
But Robert Duvall back with Tom Cruise for the first time since Days of Thunder.
Hot
damn.
Good to see him
it
again.
is so great. I had actually forgotten obviously I'd written out my notes and I knew that he was in the film, but when I get to that sequence where he goes into the gun range in Ohio,
in the opening credits
so
against the Pittsburgh skyline, which turns out is kind of nice. Again, Pittsburgh.
Already kind of baffled by the presence of Werner Herzog.
Yeah, exactly. And I just forgot. So when he came on screen, I was like, Duvall.
Yeah, really, really fantastic. So this opening sequence, the slow establishing of this attack that is going to take place. We then see the attack executed. We have the investigation. We have this fantastic monologue. We have the reveal that this is a conspiracy, that something here is not what it seems. Then we cut out to Richard Jenkins' office where David Oyelowo delivers his second great back-to-back monologue, which is the brilliant "Who is Jack Reacher" monologue, where we finally come all the way down to, well, we're never going to find it. You can't find him unless he wants to find you. Knock, knock, knock. There's a Mr. Jack Reacher here for you, sir.
It's perfect.
5 stars.
We knew it was going to happen.
Best
as soon
movie
as you
I've
hear
seen
the
in
knock,
years.
knock. Yeah, like when you hear the knock, knock, you're like, I know this is coming, but I'm still delighted by it.
It's so good.
All of that opening stuff is really good. Also, when they very first introduce Rosamund Pike and the 3 or 4 of them are all talking and kind of like talking over each other and interrupting, it's perfect. It's really, really strong.
I will tell you, I really hate, because that's almost exactly the next sequence that we're going to get to. I hated that scene the first time that I watched it.
Really?
No, because I had not clocked in that moment, because the dialogue is a little circuitous and we're kind of leaning, there's a lot of inference and there's a lot of people being smartasses at each other. I had not clocked initially that Rosamund Pike was Richard Jenkins' daughter.
Oh,
so when we established that relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And Cruz is all, I want to hear that story. It's like, shut up. Stop objectifying this woman for walking in just because she's someone's daughter. The second time I watched it, understanding this dynamic, it really worked for me. Yeah.
That's good.
What do you think of Cruz's first impression? Because while Oyelowo is giving his second one, he's giving the Jack Reacher monologue, which should be an audition part. I don't know why it isn't. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's so overwritten. but it's just
all of
great.
the speeches are overwritten.
Yeah.
They really are.
But while that's happening, we see him, wake up in the company of this excessively, like this woman is too attractive and is too like Victoria's Secret runway model. You're looking off into the middle distance like you don't even remember that shot.
I don't remember that shot.
He wakes up in bed and there's a woman in the room wearing, I think, just panties and putting on a bra.
Yes, I do remember now.
And she is just like...
She's built to...
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a little bit from Central Casting, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, heard.
And then we have him going to the Goodwill and finding an incredible outfit. Like no Goodwill in the world.
Did you see there were like 12
of those jackets?
Perfect,
oh my God.
Perfect leather jackets with just the right amount of patina and more...
Maybe thrifting in Pittsburgh in 2011 was different. I don't know, but
was he in Pittsburgh then, or I don't know where he was.
That's true. We don't actually. Yes,
anyway,
that's fair. That's fair. But yes, he gets to Pittsburgh very quickly because he sees this story on the news and is like, "I must investigate. A bad man has died. I have to go make sure that he's in the ground." Which is actually really great motivation. I love where Reacher is coming into this because it is so personal, right? We're not having him really stumble on a mystery.
Yeah.
He is just making sure that a bad dude is getting his justice, which is kind of interesting from the perspective of like his personal satisfaction.
Yeah.
And like, what is it that Jack Reacher lives for?
Help me to understand, by the way, because I didn't really think about it then.
Yeah.
Why does he go to Goodwill to get the outfit and throw away his other stuff?
Because he just doesn't carry anything with him. He doesn't have clothing. So when his clothes either presumably wear out or are just dirty, he goes to a Goodwill, buys an entirely new outfit, and then the last shot is him walking out donating his old outfit. So there's no trace.
He just never does laundry.
He's not carrying luggage. He's not carrying anything with him except, his wallet, I guess.
Back.
Yeah. We get the sequence of him going to the Western Union and getting the wire transfer from his pension, which is a way of anonymously accessing that money, which is... you kind of have to stretch to believe it a little bit. But I like that Yabalo says, we can't access that without a federal warrant. Like, he's clean. And as long as he stays clean, there's nothing that we can do to him, which is also kind of this weird libertarian rant against like the intrusion of the federal government, right?
Exactly.
The overreach of federal authority is...
Totally. You know that Jack Reacher hates taxes.
I just cannot... And I love this because I know that even as I'm saying this on the podcast, over on the Discord, after we're done having this conversation, people will light the board up offering their own perspectives and suggestions about what is actually happening in this film. I love it when that happens. You guys, go off. I want to hear all your... Because I really
Who would have thought we would get so much discourse about Rock of Ages in the chat?
Right? It's so fan. It's literally my favorite thing about recording this podcast. It's so good. But yeah, I love getting, and dear listener, if you are not over on the Discord, head on over to patreon.com/nextword. Pledge your support over there. You get access to the Discord and everyone who listens to the show, which is, I'm not going to lie, the best thing about being a Patreon supporter.
They're the smartest people.
We also have a back catalog of bonus episodes over there. Here, this has turned into an ad right in the middle of the show. We have an upcoming bonus episode where we are going to talk about Weird, the Al Yankovic story starring Harry Potter. That's a strange one. I'm not going to lie to you, but I think that's going to be a particularly fun episode and many more to come. Let's get back into the story. This opening is just fantastic. And then we move into the plot and we start to bleed energy. We start to bleed pace. We're starting to like lose track. And there's always this hope when you're watching a film that starts this strongly and then descends from that height that we're going to get back there. And this film never does, but I think that the other version of this film, like the standard, post the first 12 minutes or whatever it is, after Reacher is introduced, the version of the film that we get from that point to the end is kind of fine. Like, it's still pretty good.
Yeah.
It's just a little overshadowed by that exceptional opening.
It's true. Yeah. And it's swaggering in a different way. Like the opening 12 minutes is like a flex, but not a swagger. Am I making any sense?
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Like they're actually showing excellence, whereas the rest of the film sometimes is asserting perhaps an excellence that isn't actually there.
Yeah, or yes, you're right. Walking the walk without necessarily being able to talk that talk. Although certainly from time to time, it definitely talks the talk. As I said, moments of
I think
really
you're inverting that metaphor a little bit. I feel like I think the talking
part
is not
the talking is the easy part. The walking is the difficult part.
The hard part.
Well, I'm a podcaster, so I'm going to value the talking part. Walking, that's a piece of cake. Sit down behind this microphone and have an opinion. Why don't you? Jack Reacher.
Tom Cruise. Really good at walking.
Really good at walking, I guess. Yes. He's mastered the art. But what if I ran slowly? Okay. We learn that Barr has been beaten while in custody, that he was basically thrown to the other inmates as a casual form of punishment. Again, this film's cynicism about structured order and, you know, the mechanisms put in place to protect us is just rampant here. This film does not believe in really anything. Like, certainly the police force, certainly not, you know, the legal system, barely the military, which is the kind of thing that this sort of movie usually puts its back up against. It's usually unassailable. You were in the military, that makes you an unassailable hero in the popular consciousness. And this film is really interesting in the way that it deconstructs that.
It's true. I'm thinking of the moment where Jack Reacher walks out of the car after the car chase scene and all the people are waiting for the bus.
I want to talk about that so much when we get there.
Well, wait till we get there. But
that's the thing. The car chase sucks so bad, and then that last moment is so weird and interesting and provocative.
Yeah. Completely agree. Okay, I'll wait.
Get there for sure. So we learned that Barr has been beaten. This is really just a way of writing him out so that we don't have firsthand testimony about, you know, this particular mystery.
Naturally.
Jack meets
We don't even get to hear him say he didn't do it.
Exactly right. Yeah. Jack meets with Alan, who will then be present through the rest of the film in that scene that we mentioned earlier in the corridor, which is quite strong when you understand what is happening. Unlike the first time I went through it. It turns out that Barr is the kind of guy who joins the army because he wants to kill. He winds up murdering 4 people in Iraq, which is swept under the rug because those 4 people happened to be the worst kind of people ever.
Real bad guys.
Just extremely bad guys.
Coincidental.
But that is a coincidence.
Yeah.
Right. Which is... This is, you know, the Jack Reacher moral philosophy, which is, again, kind of libertarian, right?
Definitely.
It doesn't matter what the consequence is. You did not act in the correct way. You did not act out of the correct principle, out of the right, you know, ethical consideration. That makes you a bad person. Which, of course, I mean... Yes. He's a very bad person, right?
No, shoot people. Yeah. Yes. Even the bad ones.
But it's still, it's a little complex. We get this little staged exit, this completely unnecessary staged exit where Reacher gets on the bus but then isn't on the bus, and then all of a sudden he's there in the road and he said, you understand what this means? It means that I'm going to be in a movie for an hour and a half and you're going to have to go and talk to the victims' families, right? And then we transition out so that she can go and get the sob story from the victim's dad, which is terrible.
Yeah.
This is an extremely poor scene.
To put her under threat... I never quite understood what Reacher's motivation here was. Like, what was his point in doing this?
Well, superficially, it appears that he is just being like a little morally superior, a little heavy-handed, a little sententious, and that he wants her to sit in the experience of this terrible crime, which is ridiculous because, A, no one in America is free of this kind of crime. No one in America has a life that has not been touched directly or indirectly by this kind of horror. And I understand that maybe it's a gambit to connect with the audience. Maybe we really want to you know, show our bona fides, right? To establish like a good moral rectitude vis-a-vis gun violence in America, particularly indiscriminate gun violence in America. So that's, I think, maybe one explanation, but really narratively, the purpose of that scene is to get her out so that she can talk to her dad on the curb and we can kind of cast doubt on what kind of man he is, right?
I don't know. I'm wondering if it was a test, if he wanted to see how smart she was, because he had already connected the dots between the guy having the affair and the woman who was the real target.
But he doesn't even know about the victims yet. He hasn't seen the evidence yet. This is literally the first thing that he sends her to do.
So he wasn't one step ahead.
I mean, was he one step ahead? We have no way of knowing because the film is keeping us so far from Jack's experience and certainly Jack's knowledge as he figures
this bit of sleuthing I did find fascinating. And we called it, right?
Absolutely
this is one of the few films that we watched together. Usually we watch them apart to take our notes separately. But when we get the whole thing about how, they were fighting and they had bad last words, but she's comforted knowing that he died next to a bouquet of roses for her, we're like, honey, those aren't for you. That's not how this works.
Which is a really you're actually jumping ahead. It's a while before we get. It's almost at the midpoint of the film that we get that particular reveal. Yeah, we keep kind of going back.
That's why I'm confused about it.
Resetting incrementally. Okay. Yeah, no, this is just the story of the girl who wanted to go to China, who agreed to be a babysitter for this girl for a few days longer so she could go to her birthday party. It's just a tragic story.
It's just
There's
tragedy.
nothing there except a terrible thing has happened. Like a terrible thing has been done to the life of this young woman. And she, by all accounts, is the innocent party.
She's most innocent. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I was jumping ahead.
So we are just establishing that this is the cost of gun violence in America. And you know what? That's fine. We could probably do more of that in our popular fiction until things change, quite frankly. But that also doesn't align with the way that we treat guns through the rest of this movie, you know?
No.
It certainly doesn't align with the argument. I found incredibly odious argument that Reacher uses to get Robert Duvall on his side when he goes to the gun range, which is, if you don't help me, people are going to find out what you did or what happened here. And then some soccer mom with nothing better to do is going to shut down your gun range that is only used for snipers in the hills of Ohio. This movie It's saying something, but I'm still not entirely sure what. And I'm not sure that it is either. But really, I think the ultimate explanation for that sequence is the scene that she gets with her dad by the curb after talking to the victim's family, where he is opposed to her talking to the victim's family, right? We get this experience of, yes, moral rectitude. And then he comes in to say, no, that is not what you are doing. This is putting you in danger. You shouldn't be emotionally connecting to these people. This isn't about individual people. It's about the mechanisms of the justice system. Mm-hmm. And he is adopting this impersonal perspective that makes him a bad guy in the moral framework of the film anyway, regardless of the fact that he turns out to not actually be connected to the conspiracy, right? Just putting too much faith in the system over the person, the individual, makes you a bad dude in the world of Jack Reacher.
So interesting.
Right?
There's chewy stuff. Yeah.
Reacher himself, meanwhile, is investigating the crime scene. He determines that Barr would not have chosen the parking garage. This is all while being watched by Linsky, a small-time local criminal who is, I think, really good. I love the guy who plays Linsky. It's such an interesting energy, particularly his showdown with Werner Herzog later, which we'll get to in due course. This leads to Reacher visiting a local bar and a terrible scene in which he is propositioned by a teenager. This is Canadian actress Alexia Fast, who was literally 19 years old when this film was shot. He winds up fighting in the streets with a bunch of guys led by Josh Hellman, the Australian actor.
I don't want to skip where he's just gross and slut-shamey here, though. Like, he actually, like, Jack Reacher actually is. Not him playing a part, not him, like, you know, trying to force the hand of these guys to come and beat him up. But
tactical reason for him to be such an odious asshole through this sequence.
I completely agree. Yeah. And yet still come out somehow as the good guy because he didn't grope her? What?
Right. This is exactly what I said in the trailer game, right? He's such a hero that he refuses to sleep with a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Wow. Had any of us that kind of moral power.
Jesus.
It sucks. And even on the level of like individual lines of dialogue, it sucks. It's just shockingly badly written.
It's a really bad sequence. It's the worst in the film.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know, because we do some bullshit later, I'll tell you what. But this is really, really bad. When we get outside and he's kind of, I don't know, a little more self-possessed. He's just not going out of his way to insult women, I suppose.
Yeah.
And he's kind of
young
taking...
women.
Very young women.
Children, basically.
Taking tactical control of the situation. Like, I think the fight choreography is really quite nice.
Fight choreography is good. And I liked his calling what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty hot, actually.
We can kind of be on side with that. But yeah, his treatment of Sandy in particular, just...
Who's also giving this, like, noir, small-town girls like me, it's all we can do.
You're absolutely right. Yes. In a more traditional noir. Well, and in fact... You're right. This is just occurring to me now. But we actually play the beats of exactly that story.
We totally do.
She is there to seduce him into darkness. He kind of comes through the fire and then gets her out of town. He literally puts her on a bus out of town, which is exactly what you do to the good girl in a noir story, because the hero can't leave town. He cannot be redeemed. He cannot escape the taint that is upon him. But she can. Oh, God. Yeah, it's right there in the heart of the film, and we do it without any real focus or attention at all. I was mentioning, Josh Hellman, the leader of this pack of ne'er-do-wells who are showing up to beat up a guy on the street at the insistence of this small town.
Yeah, he looked familiar.
Local criminal. Yeah, he's well known now for the Mad Max movies. He is an Australian actor. He's known for the Mad Max movies, including Furiosa, which just came out as of this recording. And he's in the tail end of the X-Men franchise. He plays William Stryker in the last couple of X-Men movies. But you've seen him in things. He's quite distinctive. Yep. I think he's quite good here, although his grip on the accent is... tenuous at best. Tenuous at best. The fight scene's pretty strong, but then the cops show up too early, which tips Jack Reacher off that this is in fact a setup. Which is kind of smart, right? We're giving him an intelligence as well as a physical
everything once
capability.
He gets outside, I think is pretty good. It's just all the stuff that's inside the bar that's so terrible.
Every time he talks to her, it's the worst thing in the movie.
Really gross. Yeah, it's awful.
So he's retrieved from prison by Helen, who is telling him all about the victims. This is the second time that we go through. These are all the fine, upstanding people. Well, this is, I think, half of what you were thinking of, because we split this in half too. Reacher is already thinking that perhaps something more is happening here. And the innocent victims of the sniper immediately revealed to be a naive perspective on the world from Helen there. So it's a good thing that she went and spoke to the dad of the victim so that she's less naive. I don't even know what we're doing.
I don't know.
I don't even know what this is for. We are deep in the plot labyrinth here, and this is all happening, of course, while Tom Cruise is shirtless, and his nipple, as I say, is silhouetted in the corner of the frame. Super weird. And then the end of the scene is among the worst things I've ever seen, where he gets so close, invading her personal space, saying that it is time to get some sleep. Gets so close to her so that he can hand her the car keys in a way that no human being has ever handed another human being car keys.
Yeah.
It is.
But we're supposed to really be buying into the fact that Jack Reacher is like a seducer. But I don't buy Tom Cruise as a seducer at all.
I don't think so. I don't think we are. I think apart from that sequence with the girl right at the beginning, right, where it is implied that they spent the night together, he is effectively asexual. Like, he's so much more interesting as someone who does not have connections. And
I would agree.
My understanding from the books is that, in fact, he does not have emotional connections. He will absolutely sleep with women. You know, he'll pick someone up at the bar and go home with them, but no names, no phone numbers, no nothing.
Right.
And he'll just move on the next day. So there's an interesting aspect to that, I suppose. But I don't know why we are leaning so hard on there being sexual chemistry between these two characters, particularly when we are not in any way going to realize that or use it even as motivation in the final third. There's no sense that he's going after her to save her because he's super into her.
Right. He would go after them anyway, whether they had her or not, just if he knew where they were.
It's the right thing to do.
It's odd. Yeah.
And it's so gross. It feels genuinely intrusive. There are a couple shots in this movie where they are the blocking is bad because they are just too close together. And if your intent is not to make him look like a creep, you need to have him take 2 steps back.
She did it first, though. Early on, I had a note that was like, Rosamund Pike, why are you standing so close to Tom Cruise? But somebody that was like in a hallway just talking. So I don't know.
In that big marble hallway. That's exactly that's exactly what I'm thinking of.
So weird.
Exactly that shot. Yes. Is it cute, at least again, we're back to like a postmodern interaction with audience expectations here. Is it cute that he then leads her to the door, pushes her out into the parking lot, and we hear not only the close of the door, but the snick of the lock as well?
A little, maybe. Yeah.
I don't know.
There's
maybe not enough there to justify it for sure. Then at last we are introduced to the villain of the piece. This is our first scene with Zach. This is Linsky going to tell Charlie that Jack Reacher is in town, that he set up the local hoodlums to try and take care of it, that it didn't work, that he has now killed Jeb and he has been distributed around town. We get Charlie giving some lines of dialogue that sound very dramatic but don't really have any, weight or substance.
Yeah, I don't remember them really.
There's a way of keeping things clean,
Yeah,
that's his whole thing here. And then it's the Werner Herzog show, and he snacks on every bit of scenery within a square mile and is just brilliant. Like, what a fucking performance.
I love it. I think it's great.
It's so great.
Yeah.
And I really think that, Linsky is also so good here as he is continually like realizing he is a realist. He does understand what is happening and how much danger he is in. And he keeps getting like pushed outside of that understanding, and things get worse and worse and worse and worse. And then his final realization that he cannot bite off his own thumb.
Which of course he can't.
So he is executed.
And Zach didn't tell him to bite your fingers off. He said, show me, lose those fingers. And I'm like, man, look around. There are many tools available to you. You've got an entire car, for one thing.
I don't know.
You know what I mean?
I think it is implied.
You think he meant bite this off?
I think it is implied in his story of how he dealt with his own fingers. And then when Linsky asks him for a knife, and did I have a knife in Siberia? It's just, it's
Ew.
really,
I don't know.
Yeah. But what's so great is the capper that we get to the scene where it seems as though Zach like literally does not understand. He knew about the bullet. He understood what the stakes were, and he still could not do it. He understood that if he did not bite off his thumb, he would die.
Yeah.
And he still could not do it, so he died. And that is what gives Zach power. That is an incredible, like, the writers of James Bond wish that they could do something that deft and precise in any of the Daniel Craig movies, quite frankly. It's so communicative of this guy's very singular perspective and the power that gives him, which is maybe, that idea of a single perspective giving you power is kind of where he lines up, I think, with
That makes
Reacher.
sense. Yeah, I hear you.
The next morning, we get maybe my favorite joke in the entire thing, and the moment where you were mad at me for finding this joke so funny.
Uh-oh.
Because Helen drops Reacher off at the car parts store, which is the default car parts.
God, yes.
Because
she didn't say an auto parts store. She said the auto parts store. So what's the one?
It's the default one.
The default one. Stupid.
It is. It's really,
and they really
stupid.
Want you to see it because they hold the shot for a bit.
So pleased with themselves. It's incredibly dumb, but There's something in the audacity of it. There's something.
It's audacious for sure.
I think I would have liked it less if they had just thrown it out. If it had just been like an Easter egg in the background, I would have gone, 4 out of 10. Like, do better. But having it right front and center, like, you're so right about this being like a boomer movie, right? This is boomer libertarian because this is a dad joke. This is Christopher McQuarrie putting a dad joke in an $80 million movie right there for the world to see in front of God and everybody, shameless as he is.
Yeah.
I can't help but be a little bit enchanted by it, I gotta say. And then we just get another gross sequence here where he goes in, he intimidates the guy. He intimidates. So gross, getting grosser by the minute until she tells him finally that she gets off at 6. And we could, ellipsis question mark?
Gross.
It is redeemed only by what feels to me like a genuine sigh and drop of the shoulders that Tom Cruise gives in that moment. No, this is not what we're doing.
No, we're not doing this, sweetheart. Yeah.
And then you're right. Yeah, the noir twist of putting her on the bus out of town is actually kind of nicely handled. Now I'm seeing that properly in its context as the culmination of this very short noir story in the middle of this otherwise, baffling and bewildering action spectacular. It's a really nice piece. So Reacher gets the information about Jeb's home. He takes the car keys. He drives there. He investigates, which feels like it takes forever. And then he is attacked in a bathroom by 2 very large men in a comedic fight sequence.
That's right.
Which
this is terrible. This
is very
like
stupid and bad.
Three Stooges bad.
Yes.
Yeah, this is dumb.
Is this a commentary on Tom Cruise not being Jack Reacher? Is this a commentary on Tom Cruise not being 6'5" and 250 pounds? Because these dudes are too big for their environment. Like, they are overwhelming their own ability to exhibit agency and perform and enact violence because they are too. If it is, it's dumb.
Yeah.
If it's not, it's still dumb.
Yeah,
it's just dumb in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of like reading this as, no, Jack Reacher could never be that big. He'd never be able to fight in a bathroom with a pipe. Like, okay, if that's your take, okay. Turns out it's the little guy. It's the little guy who's got the upper hand. Like, that feels like Tom Cruise could want that in the script.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though we are, again, kind of shooting him so that his height is ambiguous. After Rock of Ages last week, where it really felt like he was every inch of his statuesque 5'5" form.
Mm-hmm.
I think this week we're kind of, we're playing with an apple box again. Yep. This Tom Cruise cinematography. Except when he's in the car, because of course you can't fake that.
Can't fake it.
When he's behind the wheel of the car, he just looks like a teenager.
Interesting. Yeah, a little bit.
And that, of course, is what's next, because, well, this part's complicated. Helen is running the plate on the car that has been watching Reacher. This is where they're back in the office. This is where we actually lay out the conspiracy. It wasn't 5 random victims. It was 4 random victims to cover 1 very intentional victim. And even then, not all the victims were innocent because these 2 people were having an affair. So, it's a gray world of tangled morality in the most juvenile way possible. And then we're all at once. I mean, this is where they're standing at the window, and he really is making his case for his libertarian politics, right? Because this is where he talks most explicitly about freedom. They're looking across at the office drones in the building across the street.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which of us is really free?
Right.
If you can liberate yourself from such concerns as a mortgage or personal relationships or responsibility to anyone for anything or a family, then you can be as free and as awesome as Jack Reacher. This is the other thing. I genuinely don't know. And listeners, I would love your feedback on this. Does this movie think that if everyone were like Jack Reacher, the world would be better? Or does this movie think that only Jack Reacher can be as good as Jack Reacher?
Only Jack Reacher can be as good as Jack Reacher, for sure. That's why it's almost a superhero film.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? But we need a Jack Reacher is the thing.
We
because
do. Everyone needs a superhero.
We can't trust the systems.
Of course. Yeah.
I would almost at this point, considering where the Mission Impossible franchise goes in the future of this podcast, I would maybe be interested in seeing these directors switch. And if McQuarrie had directed Ghost Prod and Brad Bird had directed this film, because you're absolutely right. This feels like a goddamn Brad Bird movie.
It does. Yeah.
It would
That's an interesting switch. It would be smarter. Yeah.
So almost immediately, Charlie goes to visit with Sandy. We get this creepy scene where we're giving Jai Courtney too much dialogue, more dialogue than he can manage. And his attempt at casual naturalism is upsetting. I think there is maybe an argument that he makes a better villain than a hero. For sure. It's weird that he's cast as so many heroes going forward from this. And then they murder Sandy. This is the end of her, exempt from the noir story. He kills her in a very physical and intimate and upsetting kind of way. And then the body is dumped at Reacher's motel so that he can be framed for the crime. Because how many people can kill someone with one punch, as David Oyelowo asks? Although, after we know that he is in on the conspiracy, that scene doesn't make a lot of sense either. Because he's clearly searching for Reacher. Like, he is legitimately searching for Reacher in that scene, right? So is he recruited after that? Is that what we're led to?
I don't think
because
so.
he's already performed the investigation at the parking garage.
Yeah, no, he's just and planted the quarter. No, not planted the quarter, but knew to look.
He found the quarter, even though no one would look for the quarter.
Yeah, or whatever, which is how he knew. And yeah.
I kind of like that line that we get right at the end, where Reacher says, "Even I wouldn't have done that. Like your police work was better than mine, which is how I knew it was suspicious." It's actually kind of good. Yeah. Then we have the car chase, and you're right. We've kind of talked this through. It's
where did he get the car? I couldn't remember.
This is the car that he takes from the guy that he attacks in Jeb's house, where he breaks the guy's finger, and then he takes the car keys, and he has that great interaction about, do you ever want to see me again? No. Am I stealing this car? You keep it for as long as you want.
Exactly.
That's what I'm talking about. That's good McQuarrie dialogue.
Yep.
He's kind of got a little bit of pace there. It's human. It is light. It is even a little funny. But it's not so overwritten as some. I'd be interested, actually. This is the one part of this that we are kind of lacking sufficient information for. I wonder how many of these monologues, particularly the stuff that we don't like, I wonder how much of that comes from the book. I wonder how much has been directly transliterated.
Just lifted. Yeah.
And even then, it's not necessarily bad if Lee Child's approach to the Jack Reacher novels is more hard-boiled, if it is more traditionally noir, then some of that stuff would work, and it's just an odd friction
of things work
between two different authorial voices.
Yeah, and it's just different when it's dialogue and the voice of an actual actor. Yeah.
The car chase is 7 uninterrupted minutes, which on the one hand is very long for a modern film. On the other hand, it feels longer than 7 minutes when you're watching it. It really does.
Yeah.
And
I really want it to work, and it just doesn't.
You're so right that we get this fascinating moment, this reversal at the end where he just casually steps out of the car, just ghost rides that whip, just steps right out of that car, lets it roll down the street, blends in with the guys at the bus stop. And it's not even that they don't say anything. It's that the people at this bus stop gather around him to protect him.
Right.
And the one guy even passes him his Pirates hat.
Yeah.
That's Pittsburgh Pirates. I looked it up.
Yeah, I knew.
Well, okay. You didn't need to look it up. Which of us is smarter? The one with knowledge or the one with Google? It's you. You're smarter. So what is this saying, do you think, in this moment? That's
what I was curious about. I don't know, because otherwise...
I mean, it's no coincidence that the guy that gives him the hat is black.
Right.
And that we are protecting someone from the cops.
Right.
Like, this is a very conscious move by the film.
Agreed.
To align a certain kind of ideological narrative, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are helicopters chasing him. Everything is just, there is absolutely no context. And, he doesn't look to me to be the downtrodden guy on the run.
No,
like, he's a cool looking middle-aged white guy in an awesome car.
With an awesome coat.
Exactly. So, like, maybe we don't necessarily think, I don't know. It didn't quite hold water for me, even though it was definitely cool. It reminded me of the Spider-Man sequence.
Yeah, right?
Right?
Yeah,
there was something about it.
Yeah. That's an unambiguous heroic moment.
Right.
That's you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, right? That is New York rising up to reject this kind of violence on its streets, which is so incredibly loaded in that moment. This is, you're right. Obviously adjacent to that, but much more ambiguous. And possibly even like, I'm leaving space for the possibility that this is just a bad idea. This is badly executed. This is insufficient to motivate these people.
Yeah, it is insufficient.
We do get that great Caleb Deschanel shot of Reacher on the bus in the hat as the bus pulls out and Emerson's in the background.
It is good.
Some of the cinematography really strong. From there, the movie really picks up its pace. This is where we go out to the gun range. This is where we go and meet Robert Duvall in, a scene that begins politically very dubiously. I'm really not happy with the narrative about soccer moms with nothing better to do, as though they are some kind of social cans. Yeah, does Jack Reacher not believe that? Does Jack Reacher really not believe that is a problem, that is a blight? That these goddamn women who just hang around the house all day with nothing to do except ruin things for man.
Yeah,
that feels
might be
too authentic.
Yeah, I hear
to his politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say too that the cinematography here, when we're out on the gun range, is really haunting. That moment where he is putting up the target and we have Robert Duvall looking at the rifle and you're like, that communicates to me. And maybe it's just because Duvall is, a better actor than almost any actor. That communicates to me such incredible vulnerability in this moment for Reacher. This is
absolutely.
a real moment of threat.
Yeah.
And it's an 80-year-old man looking at a rifle on the ground, 12 feet away from him. Sure. And it's still scarier than, Jai Courtney smirking down the, the lens of his sniper rifle. It's really good. And then the rationale, too, as Reacher kind of unpicks the details of this part of the conspiracy and lays it out before Duvall. And Duvall is just like a good dude. He's just a mensch. He's the perfect kind of archetypal veteran, right? He came back.
It's a great character, genuinely.
Yeah. He did not give up what made him, but he has kind of integrated, but he's still holding to those standards. He's still holding to what made him, a Marine in the first place.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Helen is getting kidnapped by Emerson and taken to Charlie and ultimately to Zach. We get that scene, the great scene where she tells her father that she has very publicly investigated all of this stuff. So now there is like a target on her head. It works really. I don't know. I'm surprised. I was really caught off guard by the reveal that Emerson was in fact the turncoat.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And I think he really does manage to communicate that turn beautifully. The performance is unimpeachable throughout. I agree. It's really, really
he's
strong.
very creepy in the elevator.
We then have what is for me the least successful moment of comedy, which is Reacher calling Helen and getting Charlie on the line like 3 different times. Just keeps calling back and calling back and calling back as Charlie is getting more and more frustrated, and it's obviously supposed to be funny in a sense, and it's also Reacher getting the upper hand.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that as supposed to be funny.
We cap it with this stupid monologue about, I'll disappear, and then you should be worried about that because it means I'm in your blind spot. It's like, well, or it means that you're gone. One of those 2 things is real. This posturing did not work for me at all.
I think the ball got dropped with Helen. I really liked when he said to her on the phone, say, I believe you. And she said, I believe you, which seems to me was supposed to kind of like creep out the guys even more if she just like relaxed then. But she didn't really relax. And I wanted her to have another line. Not this woman, because this woman is boring. But I wanted them to write a woman who was not so boring, who then said, here's my line. You want it?
Please.
Dinner after, I'm hungry.
See, I get it. That is maybe a step too far in the other direction, but I get it. I see exactly what you're doing.
Different.
Yeah.
But fun.
No, that's real good.
Right?
That's maybe a little too much Black Widow in the first Avengers movie escaping from her apparent
but it wouldn't be as cool as that. Yeah. She would have, But no, I don't know. You're right. Somewhere. We'd have to workshop
No. But something along the, yes, you're absolutely right. A cap that she puts on it. He says, tell me you believe me. She says, I believe you. I'll see you soon. Or something, some kind of cap that you're right, gives her a little bit of agency, shows that she's in on it, communicates a capability for her. All of that very strong, very good. Because as of right now, I'm kind of comfortable with the idea that Jack Reacher is rescuing Helen out of a pseudo-political principle.
Right, yeah.
Because he has no personal connection. Because honestly, how could you have a personal connection with this sketch of a woman?
And it's been like 3 days. So,
and it's been like 3 days.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And from there, we basically move into the final action sequence. He goes to Cash and asks him for help, and he agrees, of course. We get the somewhat odd comedic sequence. The first moment that Reacher is playing Ethan Hunt in this moment where he's driving Helen's car backwards into the quarry. And we're getting, this was a bad idea. I shouldn't have done this. He's talking to himself in this metatextual way.
Yeah.
In this, honestly, Marvel movie kind of way. That felt very, Kevin Feige, Russo brothers kind of, we're being funny in the midst of everything and he's kind of scrappy and he's on the back foot. But that's not Jack Reacher. That's other characters Tom Cruise has played for sure. But
that
not
we like
this
more.
Guy. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe. I can't deny an affection for Jack Reacher because he is this monolithic, mythical figure, right? Like Jack Reacher is Paul Bunyan is a thing that I can kind of lean into a little bit. It heightens all the American Gothic melodrama.
Totally.
I'm kind of into that. So we go into the quarry and there's a ton of gunfire and Robert Duvall's a match and we play it all through much as you'd expect. The surprise doesn't come to the end. It's kind of cool when he kills Emerson, but that's just a demonstration of skill. And we have already seen that Jack Reacher has an infinite level of skill. There is no task that he cannot accomplish. What really challenges him is the showdown with Zach, which I think really works, where Zach is talking about, you just killed all of the witnesses. So now it's your word against mine, and I'm an old man. So the odds of me ever facing a prison very slim. And if I do, it'll be a retirement resort.
Yes.
There is no justice here. Nothing you can do now is going to make things right. So then Reacher kills him.
Yeah.
And that, for some reason, the film does not believe that that is a politically or ideologically provocative act, but it is.
But of course it is.
Should be.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Well, and I mean, I think they do, because then Helen says, what are we going to do now? And justice won't be done. And he's like, I just did it.
No, that is the film doubling down on. Nothing problematic happened here. This is the right thing to do. This is unambiguously the right thing to do. It's so uninterrogated.
Yeah.
For such an outrageous thing for the action star in a major motion picture to do. It's
I hear what you're saying.
Wild. Like, Bond does a thing like that, and the rest of that movie is about how Bond is grey, he's going rogue, and he's motivated by this operatic level of angst and torment, right? Like, but there's none of that.
Well,
this is just an old man that 5 minutes ago you didn't know. It's, I don't know. We're so used to action heroes, to action narratives, right? The American action narrative ultimately defaults to the system. It reverts to the status quo, and we trust in the culture, the society that we have created. And the fact that this very casually, like so casually that you would not even notice, absolutely rejects that viewpoint, I find fascinating.
Yeah, it's like the only real authority and the only thing that is true justice, I suppose, is Jack Reacher's own moral compass, and whatever he decides
and that
is
his
good or right,
moral compass is sufficient.
It's completely unimpeachable.
Like, you're right. It's one thing to do this. It's one thing to kill this old man. It's quite another to kill this old man and be so sure in your core, in your heart of hearts, that you have the moral right to do this, that you have enacted an unassailable justice.
Yeah.
I mean, God, that is outrageous. I know that's not the first time I've used that word in this podcast, but God, that is wild that it's uninterrogated. Absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah.
I find the fact that it is not interrogated to be literally the only interesting thing about it, because otherwise, I mean, Herzog is great. I think Cruise is great in that moment. I think it's, there's a real tension in the scene, but it's a shocking thing for it to go so unremarked upon. We have the very brief, kind of obligatory scene up on the rise above the quarry where Helen is introduced to Cash, so that Cash, it seems to me, can kind of co-sign Reacher's like qualities as a man. Like, don't worry, he's a good dude, he's a hero, everything's gonna be. Don't worry, little lady, I met this guy 5 minutes ago and he's a good one, let me tell you.
Your American grandpa. I'm telling you that it's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone's American. Robert Duvall, founding father of this great nation, hereby co-sign everything that Jack Reacher has done. No, you're exactly right. Then we have Helen talking to Barr, who feels, yes, as I mentioned earlier, such contrition for the crimes that he committed in Iraq that he is willing to accept, despite not remembering this particular attack, he is willing to accept that he did it and take the punishment for it, which is a sufficient contrition that we can feel good about justice being done in this particular case. That is that he will not, in fact, be sentenced or found guilty of these particular crimes, because these particular crimes he didn't commit. So there you are. And then we cut to Jack Reacher, because wherever there is trouble, wherever there is a woman being harassed on a bus.
This is more than harassment. This sounds like actual domestic violence happening on a bus. That was awkward and weird.
It's really great. Full credit to the extras that they have on this bus, many of whom are giving really great performances of just staring forward, being uncomfortable, wishing you could do something, but not doing something. And then, of course, we pan over to Tom Cruise, and Jack Reacher takes action, which should be the title for the sequel film, but it's not. He will, in fact, never look back. And we'll get to that in 4 weeks' time here on The Last Star in Hollywood. Elizabeth, where on earth are we going to put this movie on the list?
You know, it in a lot of ways, it reminds me of Collateral. And
that's a really strong point of comparison.
Right. I think it's going to sit somewhere around that one, which is another movie that I quite liked despite itself, but just didn't ultimately work or hang together, and which I think Tom Cruise is maybe just miscast for. Certainly
a movie in which he is giving a lot of performance that has an unclear philosophical outlook. Now, that's Michael Mann, so it is deliberate. Like, that is a really noirish, murky world of compromise and you know, you're just trying to survive in a way that Jack Reacher is never actually, for all that we talk about this solo hero as being a survivor. He's not really ever trying to survive that hard. Yeah, I think Collateral is really interesting. Collateral is currently number 14 on the list, which is right under War of the Worlds, which is also an interesting comp, honestly, for this film. So I think we found absolutely the neighborhood. Do you have a real sense of where it falls there? Do you like this better or worse than Collateral? Because we have War of the Worlds at 13, Collateral at 14, and Minority Report at 15. I'm pretty comfortable saying that Jack Reacher is better than Minority Report. A sentence that I never...
crazy,
you know
right?
what, though? Minority Report is also exactly the same kind of... Your ideology is cloudy.
Yeah.
I'm uncertain what it is that you... I can see what you think you are trying to say.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that it all lines up. I'm not sure that it all holds water. I might be coming in with Jack Reacher going under Minority Report, but then it's Legend. And are we really comfortable saying Jack Reacher is better than Legend?
Jack Reacher's not better than Legend, but Legend is so different. It's so hard, but no.
If only we'd not made the decision to order these things on one big list. If Jack Reacher is not better than Legend, then it's Vanilla Sky, which is also kind of comparable. Vanilla Sky also kind of muddy and messy and compromised in its storytelling.
Yeah.
I think I want to put Jack Reacher, and this is perhaps lower on the list than it feels it should be because the opening is so confident, the opening is so strong. But there's a lot that we like about many of these films. Mm-hmm. I would pitch number 18 between Vanilla Sky and Night and Day.
Wow.
I would put it right there.
You know, I think I would. I would watch Vanilla Sky again first before I watch Jack Reacher. So I think, and I would never watch Night and Day again ever. So I think that's the way to go.
Jack Reacher, better than something I never want to do again. The title of an unpublished David Foster Wallace essay, sadly. There it goes. Number 18 on the list, right between Vanilla Sky and Night and Day. That is Jack Reacher. I anticipate that the second movie will be much lower on the list than that. Before we get to our thanks for our patrons, a word about next week. Next week, the first of Cruise's back-to-back high-concept sci-fi movies, the post-apocalyptic Oblivion, directed by Joseph Kosinski. I have only seen this film once. It was right when it came out. I remember really liking it. I don't remember much about it. I remember a lot of the visual design. I think you were going to be stunned by the way that this film looks. I think it's a really interesting looking film and a really ambitious kind of production set from that point of view. So yeah, and a lot of crews being largely alone, which is also very interesting. It's an interesting thing to do to that guy. So that's next week on the show. We should say it might be another week from now on the show because I'm headed off to LA and it's going to be hard to get everything done. So, and my Elizabeth impression is not up to podcast standard, I'm afraid. I would just... It's almost as good as my Werner Herzog, which, that's how bad that is. So yes, we might be missing a week, conceivably two, depending on you can fit in another recording because yes, your commitments in LA have expanded radically over the last couple of days. You're going to be there much longer than we thought, and you're going to be working very hard on a real for real movie. It's going to be so exciting. Yeah, very exciting. I'm looking forward. The promise here, dear listeners, is that when you get back, we'll talk about some of your experiences in a bonus episode over on the Patreon. Always. Patreon.com/nextword, which is where you can go to join the ranks of our superstar supporters, the very finest among us who would absolutely pull off any kind of conspiracy you care to name. They will never break. They will never crack. Jack Reacher can't touch them. Elizabeth, would you like to thank our superstar supporters? Thank you again to Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Lauder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, Self on a Shelf, Jolene Stark, Chris Dawns, and the Lady Gordon. Thank you guys so much for your support. It wouldn't be possible for us to do any of this stuff, for us to spend a solid 90 minutes. Oh God, it's probably more than 90 minutes by the time I finished editing. A solid unknown amount of time talking about Jack Reacher. This has been an absolute pleasure. As always, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your company. You have been wonderful. Thank you. This is so much fun. I'm glad we decided to do it. Can't wait to come back and talk about some really good movies because you guys, we're doing Oblivion next week, but then we're doing Edge of Tomorrow. We're doing Live, Die, Repeat. We're doing All You Need Is Kill. That is a great, great movie with a fantastic Emily Blunt performance. So we've got a real, we're in contention for the top of the list over the next couple of weeks, and that's going to be a blast to talk about. Join us next week, though, for Joseph Kosinski's Oblivion. Until then, take care. We'll see you next time.